Hello, everyone. I'm Lucy Lacoste, and I'm so glad you could join us today. I think this is really going to be fun. We have Ashwini Bhat, the artist of the solo exhibition at the gallery now, What I Touch Touches Me, coming to us from her studio in Petaluma, right? It looks fantastic. Hey, Ashwini. And Shannon Rae Stratton, who wrote the catalog essay and is going to be having the conversation with Ashwini, joining us from Saginaw, Michigan, and the campus of Oxbow School of Art, where she is the executive director. So how's that? I think it's going to be pretty exciting. Here we are at 5 the hour of charm somewhere, and definitely here. So it's a great pleasure to host this informal conversation between Ashwini Bhat and Shannon Rae Stratton, the independent curator and writer. Ashwini's exhibition, What I Touch Touches Me, is up through June 5th, and we love it and invite you all to come see it. Ashwini is an artist whom I've known for years, falling in love with her abstract sculpture, driven by thoughtful content when first seeing it in 2015 at the Enseca in Providence, Rhode Island. This is her second solo with the gallery and her fourth major exhibition here. So just a little background on her for people who don't know, and I bet you all do know, but anyway, Ashwini was born in India, trained as a classical dancer, then danced professionally. At some point, she made the leap to clay, then apprenticed with the renowned Ray Meeker at Golden Bridge in Pondicherry, India. Her work is fluid, echoing the dancer perhaps in her, abstract and materials-based, always driven by thought, which is reflected by the intent with which her sculpture is made. Long respectful of nature, nature has now become her wellspring. The works in this exhibition follow Ashwini's journey over the past year as she connects with nature through her snake-like garden behind her house, as well as nearby mountain trails. It is most interesting to me that the sense of touch is explored at a time when touch is limited and translated through the very tactile medium of clay. I congratulate Ashwini for transmuting her sense of touch into each object in the show, and I really feel it. It is profoundly tangible. And that's what you do. I mean, that's what I see in your career. You know, it's material based, but it has the ideas behind it. And you actually put that into each piece. So I thank you. I've experienced it here. Ashwini is currently the McKnight Fellowship winner, as well as the guest curator for the upcoming 77th Scripps National Exhibition. That's quite an honor, as well as headed toward her own solo exhibition at Amoca in Pomona also. Is that where Amoca is? Yeah, okay, that's a big deal too. Currently, she is in the exhibition Objects USA 2021 at R & Company, New York, New York. She lives in Petaluma, California with her husband, Forrest Gander, a noted poet with whom she often collaborates. And as Ashwini told me herself, she loves to experiment and try new things. And is very much an artist and citizen of today, in that you're an avid YouTube follower and learner, as I am somewhat, but not to that degree. So now I'm going to go on and introduce Shannon. We are very grateful, Shannon, for writing the catalog essay for this exhibition and for your being with us today. In addition to her current position as executive director of Oxbow School of Art in Saginaw, Michigan, Shannon Rae Stratton has a lengthy resume. Shannon has a background in studio art, yet clearly has used thoughts and ideas to make her career. In 2003, she was the co-founder of the artist-run organization 3 Walls, where she was artistic and then creative director for 12 years. At 3 Walls, she produced exhibitions with over 100 artists. In addition, she has been a curator for 20 years, and from 2015 to 2019 was the chief curator at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. That had to be a very interesting position. Anyway, so now I'm going to turn this over to Ashwini, who will give a brief PowerPoint on works in the exhibition as background for their conversation. To unfold, we will then go on to the conversation as it might, totally unrehearsed. If you have any questions, as Ashwini said, feel free to put them in the chat, and if possible, she will answer them during their conversation. Another possibility is at the end, after the conversation, if time permits, we may unmute one or two of you and let you talk for yourselves. So thank you very much. My thanks go to Ashwini for the stellar exhibition, to Shannon for her creative ideas and adding so much to the experience of the show, and to my staff of Tanya and Elias, who made this talk possible. And also my thanks to each of you for being on this journey with us. So thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ashwini.
Thank you, Lucy, for the generous introduction and also for giving me the platform to show this body of new work. Thanks always for your support. Thanks also to Elias and Tanya. Thank you, Shannon. I want to thank you again towards the end of the slide, but what I will do is to give a brief overview of the objects in the show for people who can't view the exhibition in person before we dive into the conversation. I'll try to keep this 10 to 15 minutes so that we have more space for conversation and questions. Next slide, please. Thank you. In developing this body of work, one of my inspirations was from a California eco-poet named Brenda Hillman, with whom I had the pleasure and privilege to go on many hikes. The complex, I learned about the complex relationship between the California oak and bay laurel through Brenda, and especially during the time when I was struggling to find some structure in my studio practice. I found an interview where Brenda talks about artists' formal aspiration for both structure and boundarylessness. That kind of started as a seed for this exhibition. This slide here shows an abandoned wasp nest. It was a gift from my partner. Now it is part of my studio. And on the right is a serpentinite rock, which is found on the top of Mount Tamalpais here in Mill Valley, which is like just an hour away from where I live. And in some unexplainable, unimaginable geological time, this rock belonged to the bottommost part of the sea. Now it is on top of a mountain. My work in the last 3 or 4 years has been about California's ecology, ecosystem, post-fire forests. But during the shelter in place, the focus and inspiration kind of went straight into my backyard garden. Many artists have worked inspired by the land and landscape for a long time. And I want to quickly acknowledge some of the artists who I deeply admire, who have engaged with backyard gardens and clay. Artists like Ana Mendieta, Brie Ruiz, John Roloff, just to name a few. The structure of my new body of work is derived from the garden and other surroundings. The objects are in 4 segments, but these are not rigid segments. The objects might easily cross over and fit into other groupings. And this boundarylessness allows them to acquire multiple meanings. My aim is to merely suggest ways of looking, way of paying attention. Next slide, please. Intimate earth objects make a reference to elements of earth and body and our connection with the land we stand on. These two tree stumps are part of my backyard garden. One, I look at it every morning having my coffee. It is right outside my study room. The other one is right in front of my kitchen window where I spend my evening. These two stumps have been around even before I started living in this property. It's been interesting to me how much I'm aware of these stumps and the absence of these trees as much as the presence of other trees. So at some point in my exploration, I decided to bring them into my studio practice. Next slide, please. And you can go the couple of slides. So here's the clay slab. So people who have worked with clay have either accidentally or intentionally have realized that clay can retain the imprint even after it is fired. So these two objects, which are almost like a ceremonial object, vessels which contain the memory and knowledge of those tree stumps. At the bottom of them, they have the imprint of the tree rings. Next slide, please. And you can go the next two slides. Thank you. This piece is also part of the Intimate Earth Objects, is inspired by a shrine. It is actually just any regular fossilized river stone from India. It's called Saligrama. It is used as a shrine. I'm interested in how in some of Indian and South Asian traditions, a simple brick or a plant or a stone or thread can take on a metaphysical and a symbolic meaning. I'm also figuring out in my practice how to make references to these objects, which I have known my entire life. But because I'm in a new place, new culture, how do I talk about them without turning them into an exotic object or a reference, but also give them the due credit? Next slide, please. I had to move to a new studio in the month of June. I didn't have a physical studio space to work for a couple of months, but the new property came with a gumball tree right in the property, but the tree was kind of dying and it started shedding all these seeds. The seed is so beautiful, so intricate, almost mimicking the bark, the tree barks I saw during my trails marked by woodpeckers. So invariably, these seeds, I started collecting them and they came into the studio. During this time, I was also sending handwritten letters to friends and family. And every time I sent a note, I sent people one of these seeds so that they have a part of my studio with them. Next slide, Tanya. So the slab you saw me make the texture out of using the seed. This biomorphic form is formed out of that soft slab. And if you look carefully, it is standing on a feldspar rock, kind of questioning what our connection with an object is, what our connection with this land we stand on. And some of these rocks have come to me from a collection which belonged to a poet named, another California poet named Jane Mead. She passed away last year. This entire rock collection belonged to her father, and he lost his ranch and a lot of his art collection to the 2017 Atlas fire in Napa. And the only things to survive out of this fire was this body of rocks. And when Jane Mead was on her deathbed, she gifted the entire rock collection to my partner because he comes from a background in poetry and geology, and she knew his love for rocks. And so it has come, it's been passed on from people to people who have cared for them, and they have become a part of my studio as well as my work. Next slide, please. And one morning, I found this mushroom almost magically appear between the rocks in my garden. There's barely any soil. I have no clue how that mushroom even found its way there. But that gave me an inspiration to do this piece. Next slide, please. This slide shows three things I'm currently really obsessed with. On the left is California banana slug, an amazing creature which works like a decomposer for the redwood forest. Half the reason why the redwood forest flourished is because of these small critters and creatures which you don't even find easily as you walk. On the right hand side, on the above, is California poppy, and on the down below is California thistle. You will see them kind of emerging into my work. Next slide. A part of our garden is on a hill, and for the last 2 or 3 years, Forrest and I have tried to figure out a way to make the soil stay in place. We have built walls and used bricks, and at some point during the pandemic, Forrest took it as a challenge to grow as many plants on that section of the garden as possible, so that the future rains, we will be able to prevent some soil erosion in that space. As a result of that, what happened was he started growing these native wildflower species, which are drought resistant, because that is a constant problem we are facing in California. Now I wake up to, these two watercolors are the views from my study room window. On the left is Pride of Madeira, and on the right are the California poppy. Next slide. I was talking to Lucy and Shannon earlier, and one of the artists here listening to this conversation, Anne, I met her through Zoom. I'm sure there are many people here who I have met for the first time through Zoom. It has been an interesting time to make new human connections. I kind of went obsessed with Joseph Cornell for a while, mainly because I was intrigued by his shadow boxes, but I was also intrigued to learn about the way he lived his life. He lived most of his life in physical isolation, basically because he was taking care of his aging mother and the brother who had some ailments. But he stayed in touch with all his contemporaries in a way which is kind of unimaginable. I mean, for us, we have the Zoom and Instagram and social media. I don't know how he managed it, but his life and his art practice really fascinated me. And a corner of my studio was kind of growing like a mini garden in itself, with all the things I was collecting, all the things people were gifting me or sending me as a souvenir. So I thought of working on this shadow box. Next slide, please. So this is the view, two views of our backyard garden. It's kind of hard, even panoramic view doesn't do justice to the garden, because it is literally like a snake wrapping the house. But because the way it is laid out, I mean, it wasn't very easy. It was not a love at first sight, because it's really difficult to work on this garden. Every section is in layers. So even if you're collecting leaves, you're carrying heavy tools and everything through these staircases. But I have fallen in love with the garden, mainly because the way it is almost like a creature changing its shape, color, and form as the sun moves through the day. Next slide, Tanya. So these next 5 images are from a segment called Animated Objects, which are kind of studies in gesture, movement, and the feelings evoked by my memories of object or the place, and in this case, some specific to the garden. On the left is a garlic flower. For some reason, I never grew garlic until last year. I had no clue how beautiful the garlic flowers are. On the right is an heirloom tomato. I was really worried about my mom in India. She lives alone after my father passed away 3 years ago. She has chosen to live all by herself. She is nearly 80. She makes it a point to say she is not 80, only 79. She is full of spirit. She is all about her garden. She is forever curious. And my time in the garden and forest work in the garden kind of became things for us to talk about. Because after a point, you all know you can't call someone. You want to call them because they might be lonely. You want to check in on them, but you can't talk about COVID the entire phone call. So we had to find ways. We had to find ways to end the phone calls where it doesn't feel like, oh, when will we see each other? So the talks about the garden became these points of reference or bridges which were helpful for us to kind of navigate complex emotions. And she can't speak English, and Forrest can't speak Havyaka, which is the native language we speak at home. So the stories of the garden became a way for my partner and my mom to exchange stories. And some of the forms of the heirloom tomatoes kind of came into me making the comfort objects. Comfort objects, as the name says, I have taken a lot of comfort in making them. Some of them make references to seed pods, and some of them very specifically make a reference to the Indian prayer beads, which are also dried seed from a seed called Rudraksha. And they are meant to be touched and held and turned around and felt. Next slide. Next one. I'm drawn to points of view that reject the privileging of human existence over non-human beings. I'm drawn to rituals more than religion, to animism rather than monotheism. I definitely feel a kinship with Brenda Hillman when she says she thinks of herself as a mystic in a practical way. Here are two beautiful, let me make this, um, I want to end this slide presentation with just two lines from one of her poems. And the rocks under California are raining in their little world. This was set down in strata, so you could know what it felt like to have been Earth.
Very beautiful, Ashwini. Thank you.
The problem with living with the poet is you kind of get teary-eyed reading poetry. I want to say just one sentence before I pass the mic on to you, Lucy. Among many difficult phases in the last year, one very specific difficult phase in my life and my studio practice, I sat down during a lunch break. I was browsing Instagram just before I got on to work, and I happened to find an open call for NCICA, and the title was Social Recession. I sat down to read the description. It was an open call for artists to respond to the collective grief, to aspects about touch, about body, and how to connect it to our craft practices. I read the description and I said, who is this person? I want to know more. That has led me to Shannon. Thank you so much, Shannon, for being here.
And what I have to say is brief. I just want to turn it over to Shannon and Ashwini, and they're going to have a totally unrehearsed conversation, which we're all looking forward to. So here's to you, Shannon.
Thanks for asking me to write for you. It was a real pleasure to get to talk about the work. And I think I'm just going to start by the conversation that we sort of had somewhere in the middle of me turning over the writing to you, which was the kind of mystery of writing about objects that you haven't actually had the opportunity to touch yourself. And it really got me thinking about how right now, I mean, for anybody participating in a in contemporary art, there, I mean, you know, for the most part, we're often talking about art that we've never really seen or touched, but especially so right now, folks are looking at work or even buying work or interfacing it in some way without having had the opportunity to see it in person. And I just thought it was such a profound thing to try to imagine that, given that the work in the show was so much about your physical connection to the objects and the environment that you were making them in. I still can't get you to be on my screens. Just say something and then I think you'll get to be the person. There we go.
Do you see me now? Okay. Yeah, as you know, when you sent me the draft, I started reading it and come to the second paragraph, I go, why didn't I think of sending her something? I mean, I could have easily sent a small object just so that she gets a sense, like, why did I miss it? And then I continued reading and I thought, but this is the way it worked out really well, because that's how the other viewers are going to see the work. It's all through the images or through the words through Zoom, through this virtual space. And here is someone who got the entire work. I mean, I was, oh, this is perfect. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Tanya.
Yes. Now this makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I felt like although I could have sent you something, by not paying attention to that, it worked out the way it was supposed to be. And you know, that's when I sent you, like, couldn't believe that you got the entire gist of what I was trying to say just by looking at the objects, because I hadn't even sent you any notes. I think I sent, like, you know, bullet points, some about the statement, why I was making it, and I kept waiting. You know, just being polite. We have not even met each other in person. So, you know, I had ended the email saying, well, if you have any questions, please let me know. And every day I was like waiting for, does she have questions? Do I need to send her multiple angles of the work? Like, how do I proceed? And then you send me this writing, and I got so emotional that I couldn't see the screen. I was trying to compose the email to you. And that's when I sent you saying, hey, can I call you? And immediately, then of course, I followed it up with another email saying, hey, but I don't have your number. And then I thought, oh, fuck, she's going to think that I didn't like what she wrote. We don't even know each other. Like, but it was impossible for me to just send something as an email. And I have done this with the others too. You know, I have responded to people's work looking at Instagram, or some museum has posted something on their virtual viewing, or I have seen some artist's title, not even the work, you know, I'm drawn to a title and I want to know more about them. I mean, I think this is the kind of interconnectedness which keeps bringing me back to my studio.
Well, I think that's the reason I sort of prompted that conversation right off the bat, is that I think that the thing that was really for me was realizing, well, look, of course I always write about people's art without often being kind of physically with it. But I think the circumstances right now of the pandemic, or, you know, we may be moving out of that pandemic now, but the circumstances of the last year and a half, I think obviously made it, you know, really heightened our kind of sense of longing for objects. And then I think heightened a sort of sense of awareness about their value to us. And I think just by simply right away calling one of those groupings of objects comfort objects, it was really easy for me at that point. Like that was a quick trigger for me to then turn to things around me and recognize that actually for me, and as I imagine many people, things made out of clay are very much comfort objects, even if I hadn't described them as such, you know, as well as some other things. And I want to talk to you about other things that are sort of comfort in that sense. But this was the cup that I mentioned in the essay. But, you know, for me, sort of throughout the year, being not completely isolated, it's true that I live on a campus and there are other people here, but isolated from my partner, you know, we don't live together. They live in another city. And so really for me, really recognizing like how much the things that we turn to really fill in a lot of space in terms of like just relating, you know, relating to our emotions, relating to people who aren't there, relating to our bodies, you know, just that it's, the things can disappear and be invisible to us, but there's a number of those things, and yeah, that just this prompt to write this essay really got me thinking about, well, what are the things that are really in that role for me? And actually the kind of the other things for me are rocks. So I had a lot of I felt a lot of kinship to your marrying of other people's comfort objects with your own, which was sort of my kind of question that I wanted to ask. Is it's maybe less of a question, more of just more conversation, but the rocks that you integrated into the work, I mean, those strike me as other people's comfort objects. So I love that sort of introduction of things that come from somebody else's story being integrated into your story, and a certain amount of universality that are in those choices, I guess, because there's so much connection to kind of earth and landscape with between clay and rocks. But does that feel like a new thing for you to sort of start integrating these other sort of intimate objects from other people's lives, into this sort of narrative of comfort?
It's been happening in small doses over the last 4 or 5 years. In some ways, it was trying to seek more connection to the land I now call home, land I'm just happen to be. Some of the moving to California was a big change in just not in the life direction, but the direction of my work too. Before that, I was such a nomad. I was beginning to integrate things from each place I was staying in. Like, even if I'm in a place for 4 or 5 months, I would want to know a lot more about the place, more about the people, more about the residency, the studio which I'm inhabiting, the people who have shared that studio in the past. I was in Appomattox, Virginia. That's where things kind of changed in the way I began to bring in rocks and mud dauber nests. The clay which we were using in the studio was right in the backyard. You just had to go with the shovel and a bucket and you have your material. So one day it's raining heavily. I'm there with my shovel and I was surrounded by these wasps. And I thought, oh, this is the last thing I want, to be bitten by one of these. But they had no interest in me. They were there for the same material I was there digging, they were building their nest. And I also learned later that they don't reuse these nests. Once they are done with it, they abandon them and then they fall down. And then the next week or so, whenever I went for walks, I kept looking for mud dauber nests. And I started finding them like just abandoned on the floor. I started bringing them into the work and firing them, and they survived like 5 days long anagama wood firing because they are made up of the same material I'm creating the sculpture out of. And then when I moved to California, I think I had been a nomad for so long that I kind of wanted to find a sense of place. And bringing these elements from the land, even if it is someone else's story or a part of their life, kind of felt like a way to make sense of how to live. I happened to meet Gary Snyder, the beat poet. He lives out in the middle of nowhere in the foothills of Sierras. He is in this large acre of land. He's been living there for, who knows, 7 decades. And he knows every inch of that land. He has planted most of those trees, or he can identify every tree around him. I'm envious curious of that kind of connection.
Yeah.
So
Me too.
then it becomes a question of like, how do I learn more about my surrounding?
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
But it's
Did
interesting.
I answer?
Yeah, I mean, and I find it interesting that you say that this started with you being more nomadic. I mean, it
Mhm.
that resonates with me as an action that you were taking to feel grounded, and
Mhm.
as you sort of moved around, and that knowing is like that, you know, things maybe through physical objects, and so knowing a place or a space through physical objects, and then sort of grounding yourself in each of those places sort of as you go. But then now there's a chance for like a deeper sort of in-depth relationship to that place through these kind of repeated explorations, and very like
Mhm.
close explorations. I think that the intimate earth objects as these impressions, like taking impressions of spaces. I'm excited to see how wild that gets, like how broadly you start to sort of explore like the impression. I mean, I love the seed pods making the impression, and then I mean, there's obviously so much around us that we miss on a day-to-day basis that is making an impression on us, and
Mhm.
we don't even know it. We don't even realize it sometimes until later, how much something that we pass every single day has sort of imprinted itself on us. So yeah, it's very interesting to me to imagine like at what the sky's the limit, I'm sure, but like what the limits
Mhm.
of like what an impression might be for you of your environment, of whether it's your immediate space in the garden or it's your larger space in California, and whether it's always going to be natural. I mean, or whether or not at some point there'll be an interest in spaces that have been more obvious, or spaces or objects that are more obviously alterations done by humans. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like for you it's very rooted in staying with the natural environment? Does it feel like that's an evolving like consideration of your surroundings, or yeah?
Um, oh, these are just fascinating thoughts. I'm right in it, in the process, so it is developing with me. The Assembling California series are only about like 3 years. Um, Perhaps if I was not working on them out in the trails, this body of work, what you're seeing today, maybe wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So I would like to see how that goes further. And some part of the impressions started actually out in the trails. I have a huge collection of impressions here, and some of the impressions are from places which are burned down now. They are lost to the fire. Um,
That's incredible
so
to document then as well. Yeah. I mean, as if
yeah,
of the environment. Yeah.
yeah. So I'll have to see. In some ways, what I'm creating, these objects are made by me, and they are the result of some form of human intervention.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be interested to see how this takes off. I'm right now working on a collaboration with my partner around Mount Tam. So we are hiking these trails over and over again, same trails, discovering new things. Um, I would love to, if I continue to live in California, I would love to do it every year, year after year, to see what changed in me. I mean, when I say interconnectedness, it's not just with people. It's also we are made up of others too, human and otherwise. I mean, cells are constantly changing. We are changing. how can our works not change? My work has changed immensely in the last few years. And, living with someone, that changes you too.
Yeah.
I'm recognizing that. Um, I'm not the same person before and after I walk all the way down to the base of Grand Canyon. That just blew me away. That I kind of emerged out of that trek um, as if I grew a new layer of skin. Um, and yeah, I think I don't want to romanticize the word groundedness or, rootedness, because I loved being a nomadic as well.
Yeah.
I know why I left home at the age of 16. I know why I didn't grow my roots until very recently. But definitely being in one place and feeling this kind of a connection, a deep connection and identification with the place has made me a different person.
Yeah.
Um,
Would you say that there's, I mean, you made this work during a pandemic, so this is one thing, but I think a lot about the language behind the titles, intimacy, comfort, and then the animation. And as you were talking, I was thinking about like how, because the objects are so much about like impressions and then gesture and motion, would it be feasible that they might, to some degree, be sort of an emotional archive of you at any, as like you continue to evolve?
Definitely. I have trouble letting go of the objects I make sometimes, Um, I, the one beautiful thing which I have kind of come across um, just by continuing to make um, and that is closely related to feeling grounded in some ways as well, is I have come to look at studio as a state of mind. It kind of feels like I am carrying the studio with me all the time, and snail. Um, I love that we artists get to do that. I mean, that's how we get to see the world. That's how we get to interact with others. That's how we get to respond to things. That just that identity of an artist alone kind of allows me to talk about other multiple identities I have. Maybe because I've moved so much, it has allowed me to look at studio as like, I don't have an idea of a dream studio, because what I want from a physical studio has changed every 4 or 5 years.
Sure. And sometimes
know,
you just can't even anticipate, like you could make the
yeah,
perfect video, but something about your surroundings or like just the context you're in, like doesn't allow you or doesn't free you and to really get into that space. It's more
yeah,
like the number of windows and the equipment. It's a whole bunch of other
yeah,
contextual things that create the studio mind. I mean, if it's a state of mind, which I'm loving that I'm loving that deeply as someone who goes in and out of making art again and like goes in and out of writing more, writing less. And like, I think for me, it's very much a state of mind. I can have fantastic things at my disposal and like be unable to really connect with them. There's a lot that I think goes into being able to metabolize the world all the time. I mean, I think artists are just constantly like taking in information and processing it, and whether it's coming out as words or coming out as dance or coming out as objects, it's exhausting. I mean, I think that I would imagine that most artists are empaths. They're receiving constantly and processing, and the environment that you're in order to do that processing really matters.
Mhm.
As does,
It's also how one lives. I mean,
yeah.
lives in this world, if you are looking at it as a passing phase. Um, definitely, some of the pandemic stuff has made me reach out to more metaphysical readings.
Yeah.
You know, at 23 or 24, I was going through a really rough time. And I was really drawn to one of the sages from the early 20th century from India, Ramana Maharshi. And I read him quite a lot during that time. He talks about, so my community, our community is called Havyak. The name literally means those who worship the fire. They were half-time agriculturists and half-time priests. My father was the first one in his family to go into education and not take up agriculture. And they also the community also follows the philosophy of non-duality, Advaita, where the Brahman, the God, is one with the Atman, the soul. For me, I can read those texts only to a certain point because I don't believe in a Brahman. I've been non-believer since I'm 10 or 12, and so then that led me to read Advaitas, which is a step ahead, which talks about this, just the dissolution of the self. I'm going back to some of these readings, but I have to be very careful because right now the condition my country is in, the Hindu nationalistic government has made it, they have politicized everything. And even going back to ancient philosophical texts, I have to tread gently. I'm looking for a way to read multiple interpretation of the same text, so that I'm not listening to only one person. You know, I don't want to go into these romantic notion that everything was great in India until the British arrived. And, you know, that narrative, well, the colonialism has contributed to many problems, but this is not one of them. Yeah, I might have gone a little off the track here, but India is definitely in my mind all the time. And when I'm making reference to texts from India, I want to be aware of where the source is coming from, because I'm finding difficulty trusting those sources, the kind of in the current climate. Yeah.
So that, I mean, I think that what you touch on there is this, you know, in certain circumstances that we might find ourselves in, we reach, you know, for other kinds of, we reach for other spaces that might not be physical, become a part of that state of mind. And then you've got the like metaphysical and the physical world, both informing, you know, this emotional archive that you're making, and or you know, it's a spiritual archive perhaps, or a psychological archive, but it's an archive of sort of the insides that are not visible. I mean, that's something that I really connect with in the work in terms of its energy, is that I really connect to the fact that it really speaks to the parts that aren't visible through a kind of materiality that I think is very understandable to the body, even if you can't personally hold it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a question that I don't love it when people ask these things in Q's and A's, but I think it's sort of a ridiculous question. But I'm going to ask it because in a way, I feel like it makes sense when we're talking about work that might be emerging from this space of like, spiritual, emotional, like psychological processing. What makes why
Go
how
ahead.
Yeah, I know, because I know it's like I hate this question, I'm about to ask it, but like, how do you know that form is done, that form is the record, that how are you making those editorial decisions? Because they do feel like you're not making formal decisions in necessarily the same traditional way that people might, think about when they think about sculpture. There's something else kind of happening that in terms of your decision making, and it's probably real gut feels. But can you talk about that? Like, where do you edit at all? Maybe you don't. Maybe there's something very maybe this is the limits on your work are much more about time and the amount of material you have, and not about selection.
Yes, no, yes, no. I mean, there's so many aspects in that one question. I edit a lot. I also don't edit sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know how to say this without it sounding cliched, but there is definitely a gut feeling.
Yeah.
And one only learns to trust that over years of practice on one level. Sometimes I feel like I found clay, and that decision making of choosing what is right and what's not right came to me with clay. So maybe it is not so many years of practice either. I feel like the reason I say I found I could decide on the form based on gut feeling when I came to clay is because I think I have been preoccupied with form and composition, space, and my relationship with it all, even during my dance days.
Right.
But the relationship was different. The material was different. Material was my own body, and that kind of shifted. And I think the reason I did not go back to dance is because I felt it was so liberating to watch that happen in a material which was outside of me. I felt so confident making those decisions. And that when you feel that confidence, it's amazing. It's that is the most fulfilling, I think. Even during the studio practice, when you're making 15 things, and I'm also very conscious of not firing everything I make. I make something, let it be, sit around it, let it dry, live with it for days, weeks, sometimes months, before I decide whether it gets fired, unless I'm working on a deadline. That happens once in a while. But things have to talk to me. Things have to continue to interest me and challenge me. And if I lose interest in that object, I photograph them. I photograph every piece I make, good, bad, ugly, everything. And then the choice of what do I want to put out in the world comes much later. But in between all this, there are moments of exhilaration. It's like I go back home, even when a piece I'm building has collapsed, I sometimes go back home extremely satisfied by that process. But because there's been some kind of decision making during that, there has been few things which are more clear than the day before.
Do you
Does
hold?
that answer?
Oh yeah. Do you hold them?
Yes.
Decisions?
If they are small, I do hold them. And also my first and really harsh critic is my partner. And it's also wonderful because he doesn't work with clay. So sometimes he just walks into the studio and he's like, why can't you do this? And I usually begin by saying, if I do that, then I can't fire it. And he's like, why are you thinking of firing it? So that has led me to some forms, like some days I just make things without thinking about firing them. Then I'm not thinking about whether they have a flat base, how do I going to load them, none of that. I'm just doing it almost like drawing using clay because my body knows how to do it best.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does. There is definitely something about, at least certainly the animated objects in this show that are very much like a drawing. They have that like wonderful, very active kind of line that just like, I imagine something that probably it isn't true, but I just imagine you just like, just drawing out the clay and just being like, I think this, like, they have so much emotion to me, and they just have so much elegance that I just sort of like picture you just making these like wonderful, very dancerly gestures in the studio. But I like holding that gesture in mind and balance with the comfort objects, because it feels like some choreographed thing where there's this like a great like gesture and then something really close. I mean, this cat's really in this zoom now. but I really kind of, between the two of them, I like mentally going back and forth between the gesture of sort of, almost this open arms at the activated objects, this kind of more public or this more generous kind of relational thing, and then this like coming back to the self and coming back to the body with the comfort objects.
It has been like that for you, hasn't it? I mean,
yeah,
there are some days I'm charged by the things I see, and some days I'm not able to respond to anything. That's been, even without the pandemic, life is like that. But definitely the last year, I kind of want to keep an eye on time. You and we can go on.
I think technically we're over our time.
Shall we open it up for questions?
I'm thinking, we had said we go till 6 and it's 10 after. You want to go for 5 more minutes?
Let's open it up for questions.
Nina Lindsay has asked you a question.
You've been talking about documentary aspects of your work. I'm interested too in the documentation you do of making your work in photographs or video. You often seem to capture critical decision-making, gut feeling moments that Shannon asked about. Can you talk about when and why you choose to document the making of your work? Oh, that's again, I think, kind of a gut feeling question, but it's also a question of composition. I mean, forest now is used to my way of hiking. What we are trying to do with our new project is to circumambulate Mount Tam. But instead of trying to do that in one day, we have decided to break it down, because when I go on the research trips, I'm stopping every 5 minutes to document something. And what makes me stop at a certain point, if someone asks me a question, hey, what did you see? Like, why did you take that photo? I may not have an rational answer at that point, but something has clicked. Whatever I saw has clicked with my psyche and emotion. And the same thing while making the work too. Sometimes I record half-made objects, and not like when I have a block, but sometimes I just have to stop midway, just take photos and then move away from it, cover it up, move away. And then I'm living with the photographs for a few days. Um, am I looking for ways of how to move forward? Am I looking at what is this object so far is telling me? I don't know. Sometimes I don't know what I'm seeking, but I like asking questions that take you to asking more questions. Um, did I answer you, Nina? Like, Lee, the writings of Rupert Spira addresses Advaita in a very contemporary fashion. Yes, I have watched his videos. Have a look at YouTube. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I've been watching Spira talk. Yeah, they have been useful. Thank you, Lee. Yeah. And if people want to turn on their camera and ask me a direct question, or ask a question to Shannon. If not, we are already 15 minutes over time.
Maybe we'll wrap it up. It's really been wonderful. It's fascinating.
Thank you.
An artist's mind, and appreciate the role of a curator and writer. So in closing, let me just go back to Shannon. Shannon, do you have one last statement of thought you want to leave us with?
Oh. That's no pressure. I think I did have it a few seconds ago, but it sort of evaporated out of my head, to be honest. Oh, I actually do know what my last, I do actually had a last, it's a question though, it's less of a statement. I'm very curious if metabolizing and moving through this moment this last year, Ashwini, how, as somebody who is trained as a dancer and has now found themselves in clay, if you recognize some things in your own making that have now shifted and will carry you forward into the next year. Is there anything that you can say, this shifted for me?
Your open call, which I responded to, was definitely a turning point it's going to be a turning point in my career. That's how I'm going to look at it 5 years down the line. I was heading there really slowly. So when I left dance, it was really difficult for me to take that decision. Kind of took me 2 years to actually stop doing it. Since the first time I thought about it, I thought if I leave dance, I will not have any identity. And then I found clay, and many people have suggested, oh, why don't you bring more dance into the work? Oh, or we see the dance in your work. And initially, I kind of didn't want to talk about it because it felt like an exotic reference. I was worried about what kind of connotations are drawn. And over the years, I have found a way to talk about it. And finally, I think during those months when I didn't have a physical studio and I saw your open call, I really embraced dance and going back to movement exercises. that has taken me 15 years to
Oh,
do that. Yeah. But that urge to do that came from so deep inside me. Like I saw the open call and like I felt it in my body. So yes, this will be a turning point. I'd like to revisit this. I'll like to. Oh, there's a recording. Good. I would love to watch this recording 5 years down the line and see what I'm doing then.
is it
Yeah.
like too much or too crazy of an idea that you show a little bit of that video that you made as like the closing to this conversation?
Oh, I would love to. I'd love
Oh, no,
to. Let me know if you can see this.
yeah, we can.
Okay.
So are we going to go out on this?
I think this is a beautiful way to go out if Ashwini feels okay about that.
Yeah, I feel very emotional and okay about this.
Well, thank you both. It was wonderful to see the connection between the two of you and have this fabulous exhibition highlighted.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to start the video because the words are important here.
Okay, I'll stop talking and let's read like Shannon said in a few years. How's that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, starting the video.
Love, love, love.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
me.
Shannon. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you. That was incredible.
gives us a lot of
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.